Hi everyone, good morning and welcome back to this class of Christian education, the introduction. So this is the introductory level of study on Christian education for Christian leaders, just like pastor and Sunday school teachers, and also parents, the Christian parents who are raising their children at home. So these are really, really basic lessons on someone who is on the position of teaching, whether it is formal or informal, whether it's professional or non-professional. And this is our ninth class number 9, and we have just one more week to go. So on this 9th week, we'll continue on the topic that's biblical foundation for Christian education. And last week, we have covered some teachings of Jesus in relation to this topic of education. Education, in our definition, is maturing of a person. And since it's a Christian education, it's maturing of a person in Christ-like way. Not only Christ-like ways, but in unto the status of Christ Jesus. Thus, it is important, very important to know and understand actually the teachings of Jesus. The teachings itself, now the contents of teachings, and also how he taught his people. But we have covered some of the teachings. Examples like a rich fool, the story of rich fool, and the story of prodigal son, and story of the talents. And then there's story of hidden treasure and unfaithful servant and vineyard. All these stories are called parables. Parables and narratives, made up stories. Some of these parables are the stories actually happened in Jesus' lifetime, somewhere or in his lifetime, and he knows the story as a real story. So some of the stories are real, while some of the stories are kind of made up story. The reason that Jesus uses narrative is because it's not only easy to understand, it's easy to remember. So it is like a drawing of picture or the drama. They didn't have like movies or the videos technology that we have today. So they have no ways to show the actions and then the drama and stories to the people. Only way they could do is making up a narrative or writing a narrative. So through the narrative, people will remember the plots and then storyline and the theme and the characters and then relation of each event. This is how they were educated. And that ancient method of education is still very valid. And not only is it valid, it is very effective. That's why a preacher is a good storyteller. I'm not a good storyteller, so I wouldn't make a good preacher. But those good preachers that we know, the good sermon speakers, they are the good storytellers. And it's just same as Jesus was. So Jesus we want to remember Jesus as an educator. He was fabulous and very, very fun, and fun to listen to. Okay, where are we? So these are like the stories that they're probably Jesus told hundreds different stories, and they didn't have whole space to write all of them. They chose some of the important narratives that they remember, and same way. I mean, if you're gonna be a good Christian educator, it's probably important for you to know the importance of the narratives, the stories. And this will be the seventh topic on the topic of general topic of biblical foundation for Christian education. And explicit teachings. In the Bible, there are some of explicit teachings on education, how to raise your children, how to you educate your next generation. And here's a good example from Proverbs 31. The whole chapter, Proverbs 31, whole chapter is devoted to a good example of someone who is mature and wise. So again, to be a good teacher, it's not just about the knowledge. You can deliver knowledge. Be a good teacher, and you are effective in delivering these informations, knowledge to your students. That's good. I mean, that's one of the primary functions of any kind of education, whether it's Christian or secular. So to be a good teacher, you need to deliver good amount of information to your students. But it takes more than just knowledge, delivery of knowledge, to be a good Christian educator or teacher or pastor or parents, for that matter. And it takes some wisdom. And this particular book in the Bible, Proverbs 31, is probably the best resource and textbook for what a wise teacher is. In this story is a mother and wife who is pictured, but as we understand the Bible, this lady who is also called the wise or wisdom, and wisdom in the proverb, it refers to the wisdom in Greek is Sophia. Sophia it is prophetic and symbolic word for God or godly person, and it can be also interpreted as the Messiah. So the wisdom in the proverb actually it refers to Jesus Christ, who is the wisest of all human beings. Wisest of all human beings. Not just the smartest, but wisest of all human beings. The most wise person. And in Proverbs 31, as we read, this is some excerpt, some portion of Proverbs 31. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the right of the poor and needy. Okay? She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. See, actually it used the word teaching. So good teacher, good educator, the character, the qualification, and the personality of good teacher is all concentrated in this chapter, the verses in this chapter, Proverbs 31. So I just strongly recommend this particular chapter in the Bible for you to read. And by doing so, you will get a really good clue to who the good so-called good teacher is. And this is one of the explicit, meaning very obvious. You don't have to dig deep and try to interpret secondary and thirdly interpretation. It's just there. You don't need to look for it. It's there and it's obvious. So it tells you what a good teacher is and what the teaching is about. It's helping the poor and needy, whether it's a knowledge, whether it's money, or whether it's a wisdom, or whether it's care. All these are to be provided by a Christian educator. So education is not just limited to classroom interaction or interchange of information. That's only a part of it. A Christian educator should involve himself or herself 100% totally to the life of his or her student. That's what Jesus did. He actually lived with his 12 disciples for almost 3 years. Not a full all 3 years, but majority of 3 years he was with them, living together, eating together, sleeping together, talking and educating them, just caring for their needs, whether it's a spiritual, whether it's psychological, whether it's physical. I mean, Jesus attended their needs, and that's why they followed Jesus for 3 years. I mean, you don't want to follow someone who does not care for you. And when someone senses someone is caring for him or her, that kind of changes whole dynamic of a relationship. And that's what had happened with Jesus and his disciples. And the same I urge to be happening among the students and teachers in a church setting, whether it's church setting or whether it's a seminary or whether it's at home. And we don't see that anymore. I mean, church or Christian school is just a place where the same interchange of information happens, and that's about it. There's no care for the poor and needy. And not only the reason the Bible says the poor and needy, the poor, I mean, you understand that's financial needs and the material needs. But needy, the second part, and the needy, it includes every needs of human existence. When you have something to provide and give, then you become a teacher. You are an educator. So education is not just the teaching per se. It's like we understand the teaching. It's care. So care and teaching are very key elements to any Christian education that you want to exercise. Period. So there is no argument about what Christian teachers are to be, because it includes a very personal care, a personal attention to your subject of education. So to do so, it is very imperative for you as a Christian educator to look for the signs and the clues of your students and your disciples, your children's needs. And that's one of the very primary job of any pastor or Christian teacher or parents. And without doing so, I mean, you're not being a teacher at all, actually. So the thing is, most of your students and disciples and children are not likely to reveal real needs that's inside and hidden, or many times they do not even know what their needs are actually, why they are suffering, why they are lacking, because they are not old enough to understand, because most of their experience they are experiencing as they grow and mature, that's new and their first time. When they feel lonely for the first time, when they feel left out for the first time, when they feel they are vulnerable for the first time, and when they are hurt psychologically for the first time, they don't know what's happening. And even for the second time and third time, if you do not know what it is at the first time, it is more likely that you will not understand second or third time, even if it happens over and over again. And they are going to be wondering why and how to deal with this new thing, new experience. So when that is the case, they cannot identify their needs. And your job as a teacher and the pastor and the parent is try to help them to realize. You don't want to just give a ready-made answer. I mean, that's not how education happens. And many times in Asian context, we were given the answer, easy answer. It might be, easy. You think it's easy, but the problem is it's not going to become your answer. It may never become your answer. So that kind of education that we are used to as someone who were educated in Asian context, the way Jesus does, the way the Bible educates, where the Jews, the Israelites educate their children, might not be so acceptable or so understandable. But I'm more than sure that it is not only just better, but it's a right way of education for your students and disciples and children to be able to experience not only experience, to examine and to test themselves, and they make trial and error until that issue and that question is resolved by their own efforts and their own trial and error. Unless that happens, it's never going to become their answers. So the wisdom of Proverbs 31 here is, we need to attend their needs, and that's a part of, or the base of your teaching. Yeah, somehow it jumped to topic 9, topic 8 actually, is biblical means. So we are doing Christian education. When we say we are doing Christian education, it means that we are implying and applying biblical means. What does biblical means mean? The biblical means biblical approach, biblical method, biblical strategy, biblical content. So everything has to be biblical. You cannot go beyond that. Sometimes it may look like that you're teaching something that is secular or came from outside the Christian context. But as we examine, most of the materials that has been developed in this country, the America, they are based on biblical principles. Whether they like it or not, whether they acknowledge or not, it is true that all the education in until probably 18th, 19th century America, it is based fully on the biblical principles, even though they do not know that. So many of the teaching, sociology, education, and ethics, politics, in these areas, especially those liberal arts products, the fields, the academic fields, is mostly biblical, even though they did not realize it. Anyway, but we need to examine the contents of the teachings with a biblical standard. So what are we talking about? First, it means according to the Bible. So Bible is the standard. That's like a tester. That's like a measure for whether we see if it's good or not good, or whether it's right or wrong. How do we decide? According to the Bible. So we reflect the teachings according to the Bible. The great example, the most outstanding example of that would be the theory of evolution. So I say theory of evolution because the evolution never been proven. It has never been proven. You may not know that, but it's not a science yet. I mean, it is science in terms of that you have a theory, and the scientists are trying to prove that theory. But once the Charles Darwin, he introduced this idea of evolution of species, it was just an idea, and somehow it became a belief system, just like any other religion is. So I can say safely evolution is a kind of religion or ideology at least, or the system of belief. That's not science as we define the science. Science is something that has been proven. So, as we know, it has never been proven because just the fossil example of fossil. There's no fossil that gradually shows how certain species became another kind of species. For example, the fish. They'd say fish became a crocodile, for example. By passing it, fish became the frog, and frog become crocodile, and so on. I mean, that's a kind of example, but there is no fossil samples that shows a gradual, steady change from fish to something else? It has to grow legs instead of fins. It doesn't show that. There is something similar, looking similar, like a fin and then the paw, but there's nothing in between. So it's just theory. And we as a Christian educators, there's a theory of creation and theory of evolution. Those two are both theories. It's not like a non-scientific facts. The reason, because it is not a scientific fact, because you cannot prove the creation, because creation happened only once and it's done deal. God created the heaven and earth, the whole universe. And he's not doing it over and over again like every other second. The same thing, evolution does not happen every other second, as even though we may agree to the theory itself. So they cannot prove that. So it both remains as a theory. So theory versus theory, a belief versus a belief. When it's not a science, when something you cannot prove, then the belief comes in. Belief is your own subjective decision. It's what's in your heart, what's in your mind. And it's a personal belief. So you're choosing between the evolution and creation. It's just a belief system, and as much as Christianity and Bible is a belief system. We based on the document called the Bible to believe on the creation, because Genesis chapter 1, very first book and the first chapter of the Bible says, in the beginning God has created the heavens and the earth, period. So that's how it begins. And we must believe that very first line without having the faith in the very first line of the book and the very first claim of the book, very first statement of the book. You're not going to read rest of it, or even if you read the rest of the book, you won't have the belief. Because our belief system as a Christian, you're not just choosing to believe some of the things that you like in the Bible. That's not how it happens. You either believe whole Bible or you don't, because it's just one book. Some people think it's many books with the many authors, so it deals with the different stories and the different subjects with the different opinions and even different beliefs. No, because it aims at just one belief and one belief system. It's a system. You cannot contradict one statement to the other when it is coherent. So the Bible is a coherent document, even though it has 66 different books and many more authors. We still believe that whole Bible contains the truth, and it aims at one truth. So that's how we believe. And if you don't believe the very important, the key statement that is at the beginning, you're not believing. So according to the Bible means the whole book. Biblical motive and ethos. As we read the Bible, there are some very fundamental truth in the Bible. God is the creator. We have God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And the God the Son, Jesus Christ, is indeed the same God who came into this earth to the time and space. Because Father God is beyond time and space, and he came in to the time and space. Then this person who is within the time and space to Jesus Christ. It's not the same God, and the Father God is non-existing anymore and then comes into the space and time. That's not the way it happened. According to the Bible, Father God is there and the Son God comes into the time and space, and he goes back to beyond the time and space. So that's fundamental belief, like the birth, virgin birth through the Mary, and even though Jesus is in the line of Joseph, according to the genealogy, but it doesn't mean that he's physically the descendant of Joseph, and he was conceived by the Holy Spirit. So, and then he died on the cross and resurrected. This is again the fundamental truth. Without believing in the resurrection, you are not believing in the Bible. Some people say they can just forget about resurrection and just believe in the work and the ministry of Jesus, and he's a great character or a great person. No, that's not how we become a Christian. You should believe in the resurrection as well. I mean, if you do not believe in the resurrection, you're not believing in Christianity at all, because that's fundamental truth. So these are some of the motive and the ethos. And as we progress with our Christian education, pastoring or teaching or homeschooling, whatever you do, these are the fundamental. Without teaching those things, just educating creation and then Christian ethics and Christian behavior, and then how to go about a church, that does not make you a Christian educator. So these elements are key to a Christian education. Then comes Christian principles. The principles are the fundamental things, the belief on how you perceive your reality and how you pursue your existence. Again, I repeat this theme of there is a given reality, and all the reality is in the form of present. It's now. The past is no longer a reality, and the future is coming reality, but hasn't come. Unless it comes and becomes a present, it's not reality. So reality is present time and present space that you are in. And then you react, respond, or work with the reality. How do we do it? Your belief or your worldview, whatever your value is. Then you react to that. And also you could call it perspective or philosophy, ideology, whatever it comes. You can name it differently, but you have to have something to react to the reality. And the Christian education is aiming how to perceive the reality, and how your belief and your worldview as a Christian is going to respond or work with, or sometimes work against, the reality to create or to come up with a Christian existence. Existence, again, it is current and present form. It's not past. Past is important to design and determine and influence current, present existence. And also future is important to create or to to improve and to better or to pursue your future. But future is not here. It's your existence in reality is present and current sense, or current tense, actually tense. So this, to do so, these are the belief that includes the motive and the ethos and principles. Principles are something that is absolute. It doesn't change from time to time. It should not change from place to place. It has to be there, and you abide by principles. You do not make up or change principles. When you are able to change principles, or you can make up principles, that's not called principles. It's something else. It could be strategy or tactics. You can change your strategy. You can change your tactics, but you cannot change your principle, because principle is above you. Some people believe and think, they misunderstand that they are above principle. I can name a president who thought he is above principle, but that's not how the world is run. But that's a great mistake and misunderstanding. He was confused. He is still confused. And so these principles are above you, and you follow and abide by principles. And our job as a teacher and the educator, the pastor, and the parents, Christian parents, is to let them see these principles from the Bible. That's as much as we can do. You cannot make them to follow principles. That's something I do not, agree with in, teaching this Christian education. Many us in Asian context try to force these good principles because it is good, and you're forcing it. But by forcing it, you are going against Christian principles. This is a very irony and dilemma. But in our culture, especially those who are raised and educated in Confucian ideals, we are accustomed to be, to feel right, to force something that is good and right. By forcing it, you think you're doing good. You're raising your child properly, and that's a very greatest mistake. Many of our I can speak for Korean the society community. Many first generation Korean parents who became Christian, or who came into this country as a Christian, they did not understand that the very principle of Christian education, or the God never forces himself to someone to obey. If it happens, it's not obedience. We don't call it obedience. It's enforcement. It's also manipulation, because you are manipulating someone with your power and force and the fear. That's against Christian principle, because God never does that. God will make you covenant. Once their covenant is made, then He is able to force something. But your child, being a children, that's not like a biblical covenant between God and you, because they have never made their total submission to you as a parents. I mean, in the Asian culture, we assume the parents has that full authority over your children, so we assume that they are 100% submitted under our control and power. That's not how Bible sees that relationship between parents and the children. So there is that big mistake, big mispresumption about parenting or child-parent relationship. Same thing with the teachers, same thing with the authorities, any kind of authorities. You being a pastor doesn't make you make you have that permission to enforce and then have that authoritarian imposement or the pressure over your congregation. That's not how the Bible teaches you. So I think this is a very key mistake and misunderstanding about the principle. Even if it's a good thing, the best thing, and the right thing, by forcing it, you're going against this Christian principle. So that's a good example about biblical means. Even though the content may be biblical, the way you teach it and way you deliver it and way you help make them to learn is also important. It might be more important because they are learning not only the learning contents, but before the contents, they are learning this way of teachings, way of teachers, ways of parents. Because it's visible, it's obvious. And then there are some patterns and examples in the Bible. Some of the patterns and the examples are the things that are happening, the episode and the event and stories, that the things, the behaviors, when it happens over and over again in the Bible, either by God himself or the godly people, and God says, God approves, it's a good thing, it's the right thing, then it becomes pattern. Again, the pattern is something that's repeated in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament and it's in the New Testament. It is there. And it repeats itself over and over again. And it becomes kind of principle of acts. And then you see that as a pattern. For example, prayer. Pattern of prayer. You see this pattern of prayer in Hannah's prayer, Samuel's mother. And you see this same prayer in Daniel's prayer, and then you see the prayer in the Mary's prayer, the mother of Jesus, and then you see the same prayer in Jesus. See, when that happens, it becomes a pattern. The examples are good examples and bad examples. The examples are something that's in the Bible, and you learn lesson from these examples. But examples are usually happens once or twice. Even if it's a good one, if it does not build up itself by repeating and over again in the Bible story, the narratives, then it's only an example. One of the example might be the dedication of Isaac, or sacrifice of Isaac, the son of Abraham. When it happens once, you cannot take that as a pattern. It's an example. And It could be a good example or bad example. It depends on how you interpret, but it's an example. So there are patterns and examples that you learn from Bible. And as an educator, there are many good patterns that happen in the Bible about teaching, about education, about spiritual formation. And when you read those, and when you understand that is a pattern, then it is safe for you to apply the same pattern, the same means into your your classroom, your church, and your home to educate your students, your disciples, and your congregation and your children. And the good examples also, if the context, the situation is similar, that you can do that as well. So those are pattern and examples. Okay, let's take a short break and I will come back. Thank you. Okay, we are back and let's continue with our discussion on biblical means. And again, as we teach, it means that we are providing or facilitating, actually that's a good word, facilitating our students, the disciples and the congregation, the children, to be able to work with or play with the Bible. Because without knowing the Bible, what it teaches, you will never be able to raise a good Christian. Being a good Christian does not mean that you're doing certain rituals or come to church every Sunday or devote themselves to certain mission or task or the work or do the things as the pastor tells them to do. That's not really the standard for being a good Christian. Being a good Christian, first, it starts with belief, the true and genuine belief in Jesus Christ. So how do we do that? Without actually reading and studying and understanding, examining the Bible by himself or herself, and get very personal with the Bible, you will never become a good Christian student or Christian learner or Christian disciple. So our job as a pastor and Christian teacher and Christian parents should focus on facilitating them to be able to come into the Bible for themselves and himself and herself and help them to see. So our job is to lead them to the water, but you cannot make them to drink the water. Let the horse come to the water, but you cannot make horse to drink water, because if the horse refuses, there's no way to do it unless you force feed. And the word itself, force feed, and it's not biblical. It's against biblical principle, again I say. So our job is to assist or facilitate or to help or help them to come into Bible so they can examine and study and learn from the Bible. So good Christian educator is a good Bible teacher. Again, the Bible teacher is not a person who delivers the information that is is about the Bible or from the Bible. But a good Christian teacher, the Bible teacher, is someone who is helping the students to search, to play with, to work with the Bible. Now, the topic of ethics and the laws and so on, instructions. So you're teaching the biblical ethics. And then not only teach what the ethics tell them, but why these ethics are important. Why is it valuable? So these ethics and laws are will determine how. But unless you tell why, then how is not gonna work. As soon as that authority is gone, that force is gone, that fear is gone. It could be you could be a pastor, parents, or whoever who made them to do certain things without having the desire to do it, or motivation to do it, or reason to do it. That why is it needs to be developed and discovered and found by the students and the disciples and your children. So your job as a teacher is always, the primary is to give reason why rather than how. So before we discuss the ethics and laws and instructions, we need to deal with that reason. And we constantly come back to why when we talk about how. If you don't do that, and if I don't do that, then it's just telling these are the ethics, these are the laws, and these are the instructions. So shut up and just follow that, and that's not gonna make an education. It may happen and may be effective in a military camp or a system within the military system where the given order is to be followed. That would be the basic principle, and in army or military is built on. But church is not a military. A school is not a military system. A home is not a military system, or even a political system. So you need to help. I mean, your job as a teacher and pastor and Christian parent is first to motivate them, and you should facilitate the reason for what they are to follow. So ethics and laws and instructions will come as a result of them being motivated and learning why they need to do. Interpret and apply. Bible needs many times to be interpreted and applied. So you are helping them to giving them the tools so they can interpret the Bible. That's what I do most as a pastor. And applying is their part. You cannot make application for them. So helping them to provide them with the tools to interpret, your education is done there. And then you monitor how they do it. And if they do the wrong application, then you advise to be corrected. The narratives and instructions. The narratives is a key term for a Christian educator, whether you're a pastor or a Bible teacher, Sunday school teacher, or Christian parents. I'm talking about two different narratives. One narrative is in the Bible. So there are like biblical narratives, including the story of Jesus Christ. And then there's another narrative. That narrative is a narrative of your student and your disciple and your children. See, you're trying to give them the concept of existence by helping them to be able to react and interact with the reality through the reason why, which is their belief and their the worldview. Then there comes out existence. I told you that the reality and the existence are in the form of current tense. Then as you continue to add up existence after existence, and you have certain narrative, and the past narrative is built up, and that past narrative determines your current existence and the current existence of your students or disciples. And then by building up that existence or creating that existence for today, then the future narrative is kind of projected. So that's how the Christian narrative is becoming, is built. And our job as a teacher, a pastor, is to help them to see the future narrative and make them to be very proactive participants or creator of those narratives, the stories. And then characters and events. As you study the biblical narratives, the characters and events, there are good characters by biblical standard, and there are bad characters by biblical standard. It's a very fun thing that you find the bad characters in the Bible. Because I told you that, Bible has truth. Truth is a good thing. But truth is also about bad things. And the Bible, fortunately, it gives bad examples and bad characters as well. So we can learn from those. And our job is to help them to discern discern, discern which is bad, which is good. But more than that, you should be able to discern between good and evil. Good and evil is not in outside. It's not placed on outside. It's not something that is outside, but it is within. And our job as a pastor and the Christian teacher and Christian parent is help them so they can discern between good and evil that's inside. As we study the characters in the Bible, the narratives, we should, help them to project and learn the good and evil in those characters. And by learning, for example, as you read the story of David, the king, he was a faithful man. He walked with God always in his life. And we see good and evil in him. Not just because he is a good person, great king, and who's been, approved or uh, or approved by God. That doesn't mean that he's been always good in his intention. He had a few evil incidents, actually many evil in him, and the Bible records that. And by looking at King David, we should be able to discern good and evil that's inside. And then the events, they're good and bad, right and wrong. So our job as a teacher is to help them to learn the Bible in such a way they should be able to discern the Bible story and Bible instructions and the lessons and teachings, and by discerning those lessons should be able to discern himself or herself. And that's where we are. That's our job. And then bringing the text into the context. So there's the text. Actually, it's the text and the context. The context is the context because it's your reality. This reality includes the people, the culture, and then society or community, and then it includes the history, and then it also includes the ecology that you're in, environment. So that's called context. And to face the reality, you need the text. So the belief and worldview for us is the text with the capital all the way. So what is it? The text? It is a Bible. So fortunately, we have really, really good tool. The belief and worldview that is given. Only thing is to make it mine. Even though it is given, that does not mean it's going to be automatically become yours. Reading the Bible does not make you, own the Bible. To own the Bible, you should be able to bring it into your heart. And you need to commit 100% to that very text, the text. And you believe, unless you believe, the knowledge, knowing what the Bible says, that's not enough. That's never enough. Many Christian education today and many believers today just stop there. They know the text at the knowledge level, at the level of oida, rather than ginosko. So they stop at the oida, just knowing it as a knowledge, but they never believe the ginosko. That kind of knowing, it includes the belief. So the difference, major difference between the Christian education and the non-Christian education, the general education system, public school or private school, the non-Christian institution. the main core difference is whether we are trying to build a belief system or just provide good knowledge and good and useful knowledge. We do also need to provide good and useful knowledge to our disciples and the students and children. That is a must. But beyond that, the better and a different I should say different dimension is that we are trying to help them to build that belief, and that makes a total difference between our education as a Christian educator and then just other kind of education that happens outside. So bringing that text into context, how does it happen? By having that belief. So if it's a belief is going to bring that belief into existence, which is the context. So text becomes the tool between the reality and the existence, which makes up your context. So that's what the Christian education in terms of a biblical foundation. Okay, let us continue with the next topic of discussion. Will be part 3. Let me put that onto slide again. Okay. Yeah, that's related to just previous topic, the biblical foundation. The main the thrust or the theme in the last discussion is that our education, when we say it's a Christian education, we should base everything on Bible and Bible only. Even that something looks outside the Bible, actually it is most Western education contents and the philosophy and the material are based on the biblical knowledge or biblical principles and so on. So, but still we need to examine that. Once you have that biblical the contents or biblical examination or the guidelines, then here are some of the paradigms that we should consider in Christian upbringing. Upbringing is also a broader sense of education. You apply some of the educational principles and the techniques and the contents in upbringing. Upbringing is a broader term for a maturing of a person. And the paradigms are like a basic foundation, the diagram of foundation or the structure of foundation. We talked about the contents, but these contents are segmented or is in the form of several different the blocks. For example, when you are building a house, let's say you're building a house, there are several paradigms. House will have foundation, and then wall, several walls, and then windows, and then door, and then roof. See, Basically that's how we can describe a house or building. And then each like a foundation that laid on, and the walls, 4 different walls, and then inside the walls and the rooms, these are paradigms. And the roof is another paradigm. So is a paradigm is formulated with or formed with several smaller paradigms. So we are going to discuss paradigms in Christian upbringing. First, ecology of learning. So when you are talking and discussing and looking at the topic of a Christian education, something that is called ecology is very important. And anything you do, actually, you need to think that thing in terms of ecology. It's a broader thing. Let me try to explain. Let's say there is a pine tree for you're trying to get a Christmas tree, a pine tree, and pine tree does not live in a desert. See, pine tree is growing in a forest where there are some other trees and some other kind of plants. And then it takes a certain soil and certain climate and certain altitude, the height of the mountain, to grow a good pine tree. If you bring that pine tree into a desert somewhere in like a Mojave Desert in California and plant it there, it's not gonna grow. It's gonna die within a few days or within a few months at least. So the ecology, including the weather, climate, and then the height of the, and then other trees standing, that is key and important. So ecology is the surroundings that are interacting with what is going to happen or with that particular subject. So when we talk about Christian education, let's say we have one disciple or a student or a child. He or she is not just gonna mature and grow by himself or herself because you are a teacher or you're a pastor. So that it has a lot of other elements that are involved that are going to influence your children or your student or your disciple. So that's kind of ecology that we are going to discuss about. And we need to look into all these surrounding elements that are going to consist or create a learning environment. So ecology of learning, another word would be learning environment, but ecology is a bigger term than environment. And that's the reason I chose the term ecology instead of environment. So let's look into the ecology of Christian learning. Actually, it's Christian learning, not just learning. Why ecology? It takes a whole village. We have talked about this. It takes a whole village to raise a child. That's all the same in Western, not Western, I think the word came from somewhere in Africa. That's a proverb or the sayings in Africa somewhere, and it takes a whole village. And that's a wisdom more than a parents, more than a church. It takes more than a church to raise a child in a Christian education. And there are also other related key areas. Not only the theology or doctrine or Bible teaching, there's some other things that are related and are sometimes critical for a successful Christian education. You may interpret this or the word successful in a very different way than I perceive, but for me, a successful means biblically correct, biblically appropriate. That's my definition of successful Christian education. Anyway, and then it involves all different kind of expertise or skills for easier understanding. So all different kind of skills, and then the professions to bring up a good Christian student or good Christian disciple. So the reason we need to talk about ecology again is it does not happen within just the church, within a home. Everyone has to do the best and better. Integration and consilience. Let's say here is a subject of our education or formation or upbringing, whatever the word that you may choose. And then it involves certain parts or members or person or expertise, as we talk about. Integration means not only each element, whatever they might be, are going to direct itself to the subject of the study, but integration means they need to also create a network or relationship among them. When that happens, the education is going to be more effective. For example, it can be your family, the church, and school, for example. And then the friends or peers or other influence. So basically, we can talk about church, home, and the school. So these three need to at least work together, integrated, to raise a child in a Christian way. If that does not happen, then there might be a chaos. Because you do not know and understand what others are teaching, and sometimes or often these teachings are not in agreement, meaning they teach different principles, different things, or the approach and strategy of the education might be different. The means might be different. The emphasis may be different. When that happens, child is going to be confused. Your disciple, your students is going to be confused. So to just stay with the example of a child, these three least need to be they need to be in one accord. It has to be integrated. Consilience of academics. That means that you're learning. I mean, you're a student. Your child. Let's say your child. Stay with the child. Okay. Say he's in 7th grade. When you're in 7th grade, you learn many different subjects. Mathematics, usually they're neutral. But when it comes to science, chemistry, biology, especially biology, and then sociology especially, and then American history, say, and then say music, yeah, and arts. They are not so neutral at all either. So except in mathematics or physics, chemistries, some of those subjects, other subjects, the biology, even though it's a part of natural science, it can be either it can be creationist, can be evolutionist. And ethics, if you're teaching ethics, that is very matter. So these academics, different academics, need to be integrated, and we call it consilience. Consilience is the total whole system is integrated, so it is creating a certain unity with it. It's a one system, not one against another, or one teaching A while B teaching C. So that consilience, working together in one unison and one unity, is very important for Christian education. And not only the academic consilience, the ecology integration are key. So our job as a pastor and the teacher, the school, let's say we have a private Christian school that is working with a particular church. Usually for example, the Lutheran church in America in the past, and even today, they have a school within their church ground, church campus. So school has a church and church has a school, and then usually the congregation, the parents, the congregation, and the child in that congregation is sent to that Lutheran school. Similar thing with the Catholic Church. There's a Catholic parish, and they will have a school up to high school system, sometimes even to the college. And then Catholic members in the church are their priorities in the admission to that Catholic school. So when we are talking about those kind of system, the church and the school and the parents need to work very close together to be integrated and to reach the consilience. And then there are just kind of learning environments that are these. These are some of the learning environment. Some examples, not all of them, but some of the examples. Let's talk about each one of them, and then try to learn the significance and then the implications. Let's say culture. Like I said many times in our study, especially in Christian education, when we talk about the education, the culture is very influential. I talked about the Asian culture, especially Korea, Japan, and China. We share a very similar idea about the education. I mean, for example, Korea was largely influenced by the Chinese philosophy, uh, mainly reflected as a Confucius ideal. I don't think they no longer teaches those in Chinese school system, but the culture still is there, and culture is very influential. Without knowing that is as a Confucius and all the Chinese the overriding culture that you are there, and then that influenced Korea a lot, especially in Joseon dynasty, which lasts like a 500 years. Their main philosophy was Confucius ideal, and then within the culture, that educational philosophy and ecology is built, and culture is larger than your education, so culture does influence. And then the Korea has the history of 36 years of Japanese occupation, and then while the Japanese occupied Korea, the whole school system just followed exactly just as a Japanese system, which was more like a militant and authoritarian. And then that same, I mean, it is built in to the culture when it happens like a 30 years or plus, and it is still there. So as we try to understand the Korean education system and the philosophy and the environment, especially the learning environment, there's a very cultural element. The thing is, these cultural elements, that militant, Confucius, and authoritarian, these are still in the church, Korean church, whether they like it or not, whether they are conscious about it or not, that culture, educational culture, and the culture influenced to the education is still there, and then it's influencing the church. And sometimes it's good, but many times it is not good for us pastors, Bible teachers, to lead Christian education, to pursue Christian education. The culture becomes hindrance to the Christian education. When that happens, you need to examine those cultural elements and deal with them. But that has never happened in a Korean church, in a Korean context. Even so-called Christian schools in Korea, I've been to at least two of them while I was in high school, while I was in university. Those are so-called Christian schools, but there's nothing Christian about, actually. And then the things they teach are very cultural, meaning sometimes it's against the Christian belief. And the same thing happens in the church, unfortunately. Even though you come to church, what they teach in a Korean church is Korean, something that's cultural, which is that culture which is against the Bible, or it's not in accordance with the biblical teaching. When that happens, you need to examine those cultural elements and just go against what the Bible teach. Even though this is our culture, it is wrong. It is not right. It is outside the Bible. And then you need to deal with it and teach your students, your disciples about that. And that hasn't happened many times. So learning environment, you need to examine the culture, or the culture, particularly the culture of education, the culture of that educational system or institution. So each church will have their own culture about the education. Each Christian school and each Christian family have their own particular culture that is built into their family or church or the school. So there's the culture of education that need to be examined beside the ethnic or national culture that we need to deal with. So there are two different cultures that we need to talk about. One's general culture and one's with the culture of that educational institution. Then the idea of competition, which is very strong for the Asian culture. You are trained and educated to compete one another. And you are asked to win and asked to become the first and the best. Then, which is okay until the second and third would not have a place. Only the culture, focus on the first. And even, I'll give you an example in Korea. You go to Olympic, and then you are, forced and demanded and expected to earn gold medal. And the bronze and silver, they don't remember. They only remember the gold. So that's the culture of competition. Same thing happens within the educational system. You are testing to be the first in the class or first in the school. Unless you're the first and the best, you're not counted. So this culture of competition and then the demand for the competition is very strong in Asian culture and also within the Asian churches. And as a parent, Christian parents, if you're, unknowingly and knowingly telling your kids to be the first and the best, and that's against the biblical principle. And then it's funny in a Korean church, some of the sermons, then we want to become the best church, the first church in a such and such. I mean, who cares? God does not care. Yeah, He wants you to be the best in terms of you fully functioning with what you are given, whether it's 1 talent, 2 talents, or 5 talents, God does not make a differentiation between the quantity of giving 1 or having 1 or 2 or 5, but the quality of 1 becoming double, 2 becoming double, 5 becoming double. Have you doubled or not? That will be the question that to be addressed rather than how many do you have now. I mean, that's biblical. And the many, even in Christian culture, it does not follow the biblical principles, but rather forces secular idea, bring it to the idea and philosophy of competition into church and ignore and disregard the biblical principle of quality. Trying to have a full-blown self, whether it's 1 or 10. See, that's kind of learning environment. So if you are being raised in a kind of church where the pastor is telling you to become the most and the largest and the best and the first, and that's nonsense, biblically speaking. And you believe as a biblical, if you confuse yourself saying God wants me to be the first and the best of the top of, no, that's not right. And then the history, we're talking about several different histories here when we talk about learning environment. You need to look at the history of a church or the school itself and the family history. What had happened before the current existence or current reality, even though it's gone and past, they do make quite an influence to the reality and current existence. That's why we need to look at the educational history, the background of that institution that performs and carry out the education. We always need to go back and review where we were and where are we now and where we are going to. That's historical perspective. And you need to examine that. And without that perception and understanding, you will not be a good educator yourself. And then we are looking at the personal history of each individual. Again, it's a narrative. I talked about this before. So personal narrative is important because we are trying to do the care rather than just inform the knowledge. So the care to happen, it is imperative for us as an educator to know the history of each and every individual. And again, I emphasize that confidence, not the confidence, the privacy, the secrecy, or having that as trying to keep it to yourself. You're not going to share. So it has to be confident, and then you don't share that to others. So when you listen to someone else's narrative and history, unless there's a certain agreement that you may share this to others, You are not. You assume that to be very private and confident. And you just, it's between you and that person, one-on-one. You have to assume always this conversation between you and me, the narrative that you share, I'm not going to share that to anyone else but to God. See, that's our presumption, and that you have to abide by that rule and principle. So that's another kind of side note. But coming back to history. And then finance. The finance, even though it's not the most important, it is important factor in learning, determining the kind of learning environment. I'm not saying that more finance is better. I mean, that's not the case in biblical or Christian education. The appropriate finance, that's the term that I'm going to use. How do we determine that appropriateness? It depends on, but more is not always better or good. See, people say, kind of, they have assumption, more is better. More luxury, more equipment, better physical environment is better. That's a myth. That's a lie sometimes. So financial adequateness or appropriateness as it is determined by many factors, but one thing I can say is not always, more is not always better. Other resources. For example, library, books, other supplies. And then most key resource would be the person. So I did not put into that as a environment, because the people, the teacher and the students are the text. That's the core. It's not considered environment. Environment is something that's surrounding this subject. So people are the main subject or the main character of Christian education. But there are some other resources like buildings, the classroom, the materials that we use, and then equipment such as the screen and the computers, and then even papers and the notes, the textbooks and the libraries. These are some of the other resources. But the one mistake many Christian education, whether it's a church or school, is confused about is when you have best resources, you are going to raise a best students or disciples or a child. That's not the case. That's not the case. I mean, from my own experience and experience of others that are around me, the more resource does not mean a better student or better disciple. The key resource in a Christian education is the people, the teacher, the leader. So for me personally, the Christian education is about leadership. I'm doing this in a church or as college like this, or if I also do some extra kind of small groups. And these things are all I'm doing because I want to grow and raise leaders, Christian leaders, or servants actually, or the better is a steward. See, the education should be focused on the leadership, to raise ones who are going to be taking responsibility. So that's who the leaders are, in my understanding. They are the ones who are going to bear the heavier burdens, heavier load burdens. They are the ones who are going to take initiative. Not to be famous or not to be acknowledged, but because they have more talents, more quality, that means they have more responsibility. So our goal as a Christian educator, I personally understand, is to focus on those leaders so they can lead others. Not everyone can become leaders. I mean, that's how God is designed. God gave some 1 talent, some 2 talents, some 5 talents. Those who have 5 talents need to exercise that much of responsibility in a society against the reality. So those with the 2 talents and 1 talents come together, work together. That one who has 5 talents does not mean he or she is a better person than the ones who has 1 talent or 2 talents. That's biblical principle again. So please do not confuse or have the notion someone who's with the 5 talents are the better person than better students than the ones who has who just exercise and exhibit 1 talent. He or she is just equipped or responsible for 1 talent, and it is determined by God. God has given them much. Our job is to help them to exercise that full 1 talents, while we're trying to help one with the 5 talents to exhibit that 5 talents in full extent. So that's my philosophy about the education, and especially the Christian education. But I rather focus my efforts on 5 talents so that person can help, again, one with the 2 talents and 1 talents, and work together. See, so the person, when we talk about the other resources, we want to grow someone who can utilize these resources. So, 1 talent, 5 talents, the leadership and stewardship is the key, some of the key words for the Christian education. Okay, let's go more into this something cultural context, which is very important for us in an Asian context. Western versus Asian. I used not and but versus. It's kind of it's when you compare these two, there's a very clear contrast between the two. And the Western might be the misleading word here, because most of the something that says Western education or Western culture, when we talk about this, Western means European usually. Look at the European countries: England, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Denmark, Netherlands, all these countries, even Russia, and then those countries once was a Soviet Union. There, even though they are communist, before they become communist or socialist, their education and the philosophy and the life belief and worldview is totally based on Christian, whether it's Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant, doesn't matter. It's all Christian. I mean, it's all biblical and Christian. Today, many, in America say the Christian instead of a Protestant when they want to mean Protestant, but Protestant is just part of Christian tradition. Catholic is also Christian. Please do not confuse. So when I say Christian, it means Orthodox, Catholic, and the Protestant all included, who has based their belief on Bible. So Bible believing Christian. The Western basically is Christian against Asian. Mostly, when we say Asian, is the ideal is the Confucius and then mainly the Chinese philosophy of life. And whether we like it or not, some acknowledge or not, the Korea, Japan, and some other countries surrounding now China is greatly influenced by that philosophy, especially the education of Chinese culture. So, until very recent, Korea used the Chinese characters on many of its publications. I mean, it's not all Chinese, but those Chinese characters, I have learned like 3,000 Chinese characters when I was elementary school. So you are required to learn at least 3,000 Chinese characters until the end of high school. And the newspaper used to have those Chinese characters in the newspaper itself, and then the textbooks that we had when I was in elementary and junior high, we had Chinese characters in that. So that's how much China had influenced over the surrounding countries. And because when you borrow the letters from China, you're not only just borrowing the letters, but you're bringing the books. And then on those books, they have this philosophy and ideas. Then that's how we were influenced. And so when I say Asian, it's mostly like a Far Eastern countries, China, Korea, and Japan. But as I understand, Vietnam was also influenced. Malaysia, majority of population is Chinese. Singapore, also the same thing. Even in Indonesia, probably the wealthiest of Indonesian population are mainly Chinese. So, it is fact that there is great influence of Chinese culture in years and years of history in Asian context, Asian countries. So acknowledging that means the cultural context, the educational context, and then also educational culture in Asia is basically those of Chinese influence. And when we say Chinese influence, for example, for us Koreans, it means Confucius ideal, because that Confucius ideal became ideology for Joseon dynasty for most of its period. And then once something becomes the political ideology, and it overrides the religion in ancient system, because the state is usually has the authority over the religion, right? So understanding that kind of history. So Western basically is a Christian, biblical. Asian, when we say, it's more of Confucius ideal. And because of that, the church, again, I'm saying it again, greatly influenced by this culture, because we cannot separate that culture in born and grown up within that culture to the culture in the church. Ideally speaking, the Christian culture from the church should override and go over the personal and ethnic culture, but that does not happen. Usually does not happen. It's going to be mixed, but usually the ethnic culture and the born with the culture wins over the religion that came out of the given culture. So again, the Christian culture is submitted under the ethnic culture. That's what had happened in many of the Asian churches, including the Korean one. So that again translates into how that ethnic culture had influenced over the Christian education, whether it's a church, Christian school, or the family situation. So we need to be aware of that fact when you're Asian who are listening to this lecture. But if you're Western, there's another paradigm, since we are talking about the paradigm of culture in the education. See, in Western, there's a new paradigm that came up after like a 16th century, after the Enlightenment, so-called the Renaissance followed, which brings some secular idea which excludes Bible and God from the reality. Because as you read the European history, that you see, it's obvious that the Bible and the Christianity, whether it's Catholic or Protestant, has influenced the European history for at least 7 or 8 centuries. More than that, right? Since 4th century and on. So at least 10 or more centuries. So at least 1,000 years of Christian background, dominating history, overrides the Western culture. And then comes something called Renaissance, Enlightenment. Enlightenment means people begin to realize how should I say, their self-ego or identity of being a human. At the beginning it was good, but it became human egoism, meaning man becomes the center of the world. Then I become the center of the reality. That's how it translated. Instead of God being the center of the reality, or even above the reality. People begin to deny. And one famous philosopher in Germany, I believe, said, God is dead, period. I think it's Nietzsche. There are different pronouns. You say Nietzsche, but I think it's Nietzsche, or some different pronouns. Anyway, that philosopher said that. So that kind of presents how this has changed. So in Western paradigm, there's something that's Christian and that's non-Christian, or secular, or it goes onto Greek Roman or Greek Roman era, where the art, the human importance, or humanity, or humanism in a different sense, or human-centeredness became the very theme of the whole civilization and culture. And the Renaissance means going back to that Greco-Roman kind of civilization, or flowering of culture. So it's against the Bible, non-biblical, sometimes anti-biblical, and then so there are two paradigms when we say Western. So we need to be aware of those different paradigms. Then we can say religious and non-religious. This is not the kind of paradigm that, like Christian and non-Christian. I'm not talking about Christian and non-Christian. There's a religious and non-religious. Many of our efforts